On the 15th of March 1944, deep within the Oda Communications Unit of Japanese Naval Intelligence Headquarters, Commander Atsuzo Kurihara's intense gaze remained locked on an intercepted transmission, as his third cup of bitter tea turned cold and forgotten on his desk. For 18 grueling hours, he and his elite team of Japan's most formidable cryptanalysts had wrestled to break through what seemed to be American Marine Corps tactical communications from the ongoing Marshall Islands operation. Yet the sounds pulsing through their receivers mocked every analytical tool in their extensive arsenal. Besetida Dicard. These were not the random crackles of static. The patterns whispered of structured military communication. The timing consistently preceded American assaults. The duration aligned with operational orders. And the frequency usage was a perfect match for Marine Corps protocols. Despite all these clues, the language itself stood as an impenetrable wall, a phantom tongue utterly alien to anything within their vast records on Allied communication systems. Kurihara was at the helm of one of the planet's most advanced signals intelligence operations. The Oda facility, nestled 20 miles from Tokyo, buzzed with 500 personnel, managing 118 radio receivers and 20 direction finders. His brilliant analysts had previously shattered American diplomatic traffic, British naval communications, and numerous Army codes, even penetrating the State Department's Purple Code before Pearl Harbor, which fed Japan vital intelligence during the war's early years. But these marine transmissions signified a total, baffling cryptographic defeat. 3 years into the war, after successfully dismantling dozens of Allied codes, the finest minds in Japan found themselves unable to decipher even the most basic patterns in these profoundly mysterious communications. What Kurihara could not know, what no Japanese intelligence officer would grasp until the war had ended, was that he was listening to the only unbroken code in the whole of modern military history. The story's true beginning lies not in the war-torn Pacific, but in the American Southwest, where for countless centuries the Navajo people had nurtured a language unlike any other on Earth. Dina Bizard, the Navajo tongue, originates from the Na-Dene language family and was spoken by approximately 170,000 people in 1940. Its speakers confined almost entirely to the vast 27,000 square-mile reservation that stretches across Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. The very linguistic traits that would utterly confound Japanese codebreakers had been honed over millennia. Navajo is a fundamentally verb-centric language where actions are articulated through intricate prefix combinations that can generate millions of variations. This language utilizes 4 distinct tones, high, low, rising, and falling, that can completely reshape a word's meaning, so that a subtle mispronunciation doesn't merely alter a word, but can render an entire sentence utterly incomprehensible. Its phonology is filled with sounds absent from Japanese, English, and the majority of world languages. Sharp ejective stops where air is exploded using the glottis. A voiceless lateral fricative that sounds like wind whistling through teeth. Glottalized sonorants and nasalized vowels. For Japanese speakers accustomed to a language with just 5 simple vowel sounds, to even accurately perceive these phonemes was a near-impossible task. Philip Johnston saw the immense military potential within this linguistic fortress. Born in 1892 to a Protestant missionary on the Navajo reservation, Johnston grew up speaking Navajo with native fluency, placing him among fewer than 30 non-Navajos in the world who could make such a claim. By the age of 9, he was adeptly translating his father's sermons, and by 15, he had journeyed to Washington to serve as an interpreter for Navajo leaders, even meeting President Theodore Roosevelt. In the somber days of December 1941, as America was shaken by the attack on Pearl Harbor, Johnston read an article about Army units employing Comanche speakers in Louisiana, training exercises. He knew the Choctaw had served in World War I, but those efforts were small and improvised. Johnston envisioned something far more revolutionary. A formal military code built upon the foundation of the Navajo language, a code that would be both eternally unbreakable and eminently practical for the brutal reality of modern warfare. On February 28, 1942, Johnston passionately presented his proposal to Major General Clayton Vogel at Camp Elliott near San Diego, and the subsequent demonstration was nothing short of extraordinary. 4 Navajos from Los Angeles transmitted complex messages, while Marine officers timed them against their standard encryption methods. The Navajo speakers flawlessly completed their transmission in a mere 20 seconds, a stark contrast to the 30 minutes required for the M209 cipher machine. General Vogel, deeply impressed, immediately authorized a pilot program, and on May 4, 1942, a group of 29 Navajo recruits was officially sworn in at Fort Wingate, New Mexico. These men, among them Chester Nez, Carl Gorman, Lloyd Oliver, and John Bennerly, hailed from all corners of the reservation. Some had endured boarding schools where speaking their native Navajo was strictly forbidden and harshly punished, while others were traditional sheep herders who had seldom ventured beyond their ancestral lands. At Camp Elliott, they were secluded in a locked, guarded building for 8 intense weeks, tasked with forging a military code from the very essence of their native tongue. The challenge was monumental. They had to invent terminology for concepts that had no equivalent in Navajo, design an alphabet system, and ensure the entire code was memorable and expandable. They constructed the code using the power of cultural logic. A submarine became Bestow, the iron fish that swims beneath the waves. A battleship was named Lot, the great whale of the ocean. Fighter planes were called Da-He-Ti-Hai, the hummingbirds that dart swiftly through the air, and bombers were J-Show, the buzzards that circle patiently before they descend. The alphabet they devised required a special brand of creativity, with each English letter assigned multiple Navajo word equivalents to thwart frequency analysis. For example, the letter E, the most common in English, was given 4 alternatives: DZ, elk, a na eye and a chin, hair and zay, ear. The code talkers would randomly cycle through these options, utterly destroying any discernible patterns. They developed an initial lexicon of 201 terms, memorizing every single one to perfection, as no code books could ever be risked for capture. Chester Nez later recalled, "We drilled endlessly, because a single mistake could cost men their lives. In our culture, words themselves have power, and speaking them correctly was a sacred duty." The code's first crucible was the Battle for Guadalcanal in August 1942, where 15 code talkers landed with the 1st Marine Division. The Japanese had anticipated the invasion, having successfully decoded other Allied communications. But suddenly, the Marine tactical messages became an incomprehensible stream of noise. At the Japanese 8th Fleet headquarters in Rabaul, intelligence officers desperately scrambled to make sense of these new transmissions. Lieutenant Kazuo Yamada, who had been educated at Stanford before the war, reported with bewilderment, "The sounds are structured like a language, with consistent patterns, but it matches nothing in our records. It is not English, French, Dutch, Spanish, not any Philippine dialect, not any Chinese dialect. It is completely alien." The Japanese response was methodical and intense. They assigned their top cryptanalysts to the problem, recorded hundreds of hours of the transmissions on wax cylinders, and applied every analytical technique they had. They brought in university linguists and even consulted Buddhist monks who were experts in ancient languages. But nothing worked. On November 8, 1942, code talker Chester Nez transmitted a set of artillery coordinates that led to the obliteration of a Japanese machine gun nest. The 14-second transmission was intercepted but remained meaningless noise to the Japanese operators, and within minutes, American shells rained down with deadly precision on the target. Colonel Haruo Konuma, an intelligence officer for the 17th Army, wrote in a state of despair, "The Americans have deployed a new code that defeats every one of our attempts to break it. We can no longer anticipate their attacks. We are fighting blind." Joe Kiyomiya, a Navajo soldier captured at Bataan in April 1942, became Japan's most promising hope for cracking the code. Though he was a fluent Navajo speaker, he possessed no knowledge of the military code that was being developed. When Japanese cryptographers began intercepting the Navajo transmissions, They brought Kiyomiya to the Ofuna Interrogation Center and played the recordings of the code talkers for him. Kiyomiya could hear familiar Navajo words, but they were arranged in combinations that made no sense. The turtle is attacking the iron fish. The hummingbird carries eggs. When he was unable to translate these messages, his interrogators accused him of lying, and the torture began, escalating systematically over many months. He endured water torture, brutal beatings, and being hung by his arms for hours on end. In the winter of 1943, they forced him to stand naked in the snow until his feet froze to the ground, and they starved him down to 90 pounds, constantly offering food in exchange for translations. Through it all, Kiyomiya could only repeat the truth. He understood the individual words, but he did not know their secret military meaning. A Japanese intelligence report from May 1943 documented their profound frustration. The prisoner appears to be a native speaker of the mystery language, but cannot comprehend the messages. Assessment: either he is demonstrating extraordinary resistance, or the enemy is using a specialized code within a native language that requires specific training. Their second assessment was correct. Even a fluent Navajo speaker could not understand the code without the specialized training, and Kiyomiya survived 3.5 years of brutal captivity. His very inability to help convincing Japanese intelligence that they were facing something truly unprecedented. By late 1943, they had largely given up their attempts to decode the Navajo transmissions. The stunning success at Guadalcanal led to an immediate expansion of the program. Major General Alexander Vandergrift wrote with admiration, "The Navajo communicators have proven themselves to be invaluable. Their transmissions are faster than any encoding device and are absolutely secure." A formal code talker school was established at Camp Pendleton, processing new classes every 8 weeks, and by the end of the war, between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines had served as code talkers across all 6 Marine divisions. Their training was unlike anything else in the history of the Marine Corps. Recruits practiced in soundproof booths, while instructors blasted battlefield noises around them, and they transmitted messages while wearing gas masks and running until they were completely exhausted. Thomas Begay, who enlisted at the age of 15, described the intensity. "They pushed us beyond what we thought was possible, because lives depended on our accuracy." The code itself was a living thing, evolving continuously as new technologies demanded new vocabulary. The atomic bomb became Aye-shi, the metal egg, and kamikaze pilots were called Ni de Dilahi, the death wind. Each new addition was perfectly logical to a Navajo speaker, but remained utterly incomprehensible to any outsider. By the middle of 1943, Japanese intelligence was dedicating substantial resources to breaking the code. The Imperial Navy's 4th Section assigned 30 cryptanalysts to work exclusively on these transmissions. Captain Yoshiro Tanaka experimented with innovative approaches, from musical analysis of the tonal patterns to comparing the sounds with recordings of other Native American languages and consulting scholars who had studied in America. They developed special recording equipment to slow down the transmissions without distorting the pitch, and created visual representations of the sound using oscilloscopes, applying sophisticated statistical analysis to the sound frequencies and patterns. Lieutenant Commander Masao Yamada later revealed that they did manage to identify certain patterns, such as probable call signs and a correlation between the length of a message and the complexity of an operation. But without an understanding of the words themselves, this information provided minimal value. Japanese forces received strict orders to capture Marine communication personnel alive, and rewards of 10,000 yen, a full 10 years' salary, were offered for any code talker equipment or materials. There were several close calls, but no code talker was ever captured with their equipment intact. The Central Pacific Campaign powerfully demonstrated the code talker's strategic importance. At Tarawa in November 1943, 6 code talkers maintained vital communications throughout 76 hours of brutal, relentless combat. Lloyd Oliver transmitted continuously for 48 hours, coordinating naval gunfire with deadly accuracy despite constant shelling. During the Marianas Campaign, 24 code talkers operated around the clock at Saipan, where Lieutenant Commander Takashi Horikawa had successfully decoded conventional communications to anticipate the invasion. But once the Marines landed, all tactical intelligence vanished into a fog of indecipherable Navajo. Colonel Takashi Saito grimly noted, "Our commanders felt abandoned, cut off from the intelligence they had come to depend upon." At Peleliu, code talker Jimmy King transmitted for 6 straight hours during a fierce counterattack after his partner was killed, single-handedly coordinating artillery from 3 separate battalions and sending 40 messages without a single error while under direct enemy fire. The battle for Iwo Jima represented the code talker's single greatest contribution to the war. Major Howard Connor coordinated the entire initial assault using the Navajo Code, with 6 code talkers working in teams to maintain a continuous, unbroken line of communication throughout the invasion's critical first 48 hours. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had prepared his defenses for 2 years, constructing a formidable underground fortress with 11 miles of tunnels, and his entire defensive strategy relied on intercepting American communications to trigger his counterattacks. This plan failed completely. Over those first 48 hours, the 6 code talkers sent and received over 800 messages without a single mistake, coordinating the landing of 30,000 Marines, naval gunfire from 100 ships, close air support, enemy positions, medical evacuations, supplies, and tactical orders, all while under constant withering fire. Major Connor later testified, "Were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. During the first 48 hours, I had 6 Navajo radio nets operating around the clock. They sent and received over 800 messages without an error. The entire operation was directed by Navajo Code." Colonel Shigeo Hayashi had to report to Kuribayashi that the American codes remained unbreakable. Artillery requests that took just 20 seconds to complete in Navajo would have required 30 minutes using conventional methods, which was the difference between destroying enemy positions and losing your own. At Okinawa, 35 code talkers coordinated the largest Pacific assault of the war, involving 183,000 troops over 82 grueling days. Japanese forces attempted jamming and even voice mimicry, but they could not reproduce the unique tonal qualities of the Navajo language. Lieutenant Hiroshi Miyamoto's attempts to mimic Navajo sounded, according to code talker Alfred Newman, like someone gargling while trying to talk. On August 14, 1945, code talker Teddy Draper transmitted the war's most momentous message, "Nehema, Aye Digini Adani E," which meant Japanese surrender. The message was sent first through Navajo before being relayed through conventional channels, a fitting end to the code talkers' war. After the war, American interrogators discovered the true extent of the Japanese efforts and their complete and utter failure. Lieutenant General Seizo Arisue, Japan's chief of intelligence, candidly admitted, "We never broke the Marine Code. We broke Army codes, Air Force codes, diplomatic traffic, but the Marine Tactical Code was completely secure." Captain Yasuji Kawamoto was even more specific. "We recorded thousands of their transmissions. Our best linguists studied them for 3 years. Nothing worked. It was our greatest cryptanalytic failure." In 1944, analysts had noted tonal patterns that suggested an indigenous American language and had even requested German assistance. But wartime difficulties and German ignorance of the subject prevented any kind of breakthrough. Colonel Masao Yamada confessed, "Our inability to read Marine communications cost thousands of lives. Every Marine operation after 1942 was a complete mystery until it began." Major Hiroshi Tanaka, who survived Iwo Jima, described the profound psychological impact. "We couldn't understand their words. It made us feel primitive, defeated before the battle had even begun." The end of the war did not end the code talkers' burden, as the program remained classified for potential use in the Cold War. The code talkers returned to their homes unable to speak about their incredible service to anyone, returning to states that denied them the right to vote until 1948 in New Mexico and Arizona, and 1957 in Utah. They found themselves refused service in hotels and restaurants. They were heroes who could not reveal their heroism. Chester Nez, the last of the original 29 who passed away in 2014, wrote, "We were warriors who helped win the war, but we couldn't tell anyone. The burden was heavy. Many found their healing through traditional ceremonies, like the Enemy Way ceremony, which purified warriors from the spiritual contamination of warfare." Dana Key explained, "We had used our language to direct death. We needed to use it for healing. The ceremonies reminded us that our language was sacred." Finally, in 1968, the program was declassified, and the first public recognition came in 1969 at a 4th Marine Division reunion. President Reagan declared August 14, 1982, as National Navajo Code Talkers Day, but the most significant recognition arrived on July 26, 2001, when President Bush presented the Congressional Gold Medals to the original 29 in the Grand Capitol Rotunda. Only 5 of the original Code Talkers survived to attend that ceremony. President Bush declared, "Today we honor 29 Native Americans who gave their country a service only they could give." Chester Nez responded with humility, "We were just ordinary men given an extraordinary task. We used our sacred language to help win the war." While the Navajos are the most famous, 14 other tribes also provided code talkers for the war effort. The Choctaw had pioneered the concept in World War I, and in World War II, 17 Comanche code talkers served in Europe, landing at D-Day. The Hopi, Cherokee, Lakota, and others also contributed their unique languages, and the Code Talkers Recognition Act of 2008 officially acknowledged all of these tribes. John Brown Jr. wisely observed, "They told us our language was no good. Then they needed it to win the war." The code demonstrated the profound sophistication of Native American languages, as the Code Talkers modernized Navajo in real time, creating new grammatical constructions and adapting ancient metaphors for modern military purposes. The language's agglutinative nature allowed them to convey complex ideas in single, elegant words. What required entire paragraphs in English could be expressed in brief Navajo phrases. Dr. William Morgan noted, "They proved that indigenous languages are not primitive. They showed that Navajo could express anything, from sacred ceremonies to the brutal calculus of warfare." The Navajo Code introduced the concept of cultural encryption, a form of security achieved through linguistic barriers that no mathematics could ever overcome, and this idea heavily influenced post-war intelligence operations. The concept remains relevant today, as quantum computing threatens to shatter modern mathematical encryption. Colonel David Hatch evaluated their achievement, stating, "They accomplished something unique, a code that was never broken, never compromised. It proved that human linguistic capability could exceed mechanical encryption." In the 1980s, Japanese scholarship began to examine their failure. Professor Tuo Yoshikawa revealed that 30 cryptanalysts had worked exclusively on these transmissions for 2 full years, consulting with multiple universities. Captain Minoru Yamada revealed, "We knew it was a Native American language by late 1943, but we could never identify which language it was." Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Fukumoto admitted with a sense of wonder, "Using a native language was so simple, so elegant we never even considered it." In the 1990s, photographer Kenji Kawano documented the surviving code talkers, and his exhibitions in Tokyo and Hiroshima introduced Japanese audiences to their incredible story. Code talker Albert Smith told a Japanese audience, "We were both warriors. My language helped to defeat you, but now it helps us to understand each other." In 2010, a symposium of the Japanese Association of Intelligence Studies featured Admiral Hiroaki Arai, who stated, "The Navajo Code represents perfect encryption. We had Asia's best code breakers, yet we were completely defeated." Chester Nez, the last of the original 29, passed away on June 4, 2014. Today, only 2 code talkers survive from the approximately 400 who served. Thomas H. B. Gay and Peter MacDonald, who were not from the original 29 but were crucial to the code's operational success. Peter MacDonald continued to speak publicly at age 96, saying, "We showed that America's strength comes from its diversity. Our different languages and cultures make us stronger." The Navajo language, once actively suppressed, is now recognized as a strategically important national asset, with federal funding often referencing the Code Talker story. Young Native Americans are now studying their ancestral languages with a renewed sense of pride. Dr. Jennifer Danette Dale observed, "The Code Talkers transformed how Native Americans see themselves and how America sees Native Americans. They proved our languages are not museum pieces, but living resources." The Navajo Code Talkers achieved the most remarkable feat in military history, creating an unbreakable code that defied Japanese intelligence throughout World War II, with between 375 and 420 Navajo Marines serving and transmitting tens of thousands of messages without error under the most intense combat conditions. The deeper significance of their story lies in what they represented. American Indians using their native language, a language the government had once tried to eradicate, to defend that very nation. These were young men from marginalized communities who provided a capability that their sophisticated allies could not hope to match. Japan's failure was not just a tactical defeat, but a fundamental blindness. They had prepared for American technology and American codes, but they had not prepared for American diversity, for languages and cultures they could not possibly access. The empire that proclaimed its own racial superiority was defeated, in part, by that very diversity. Lieutenant General Arisue's admission that Japan never cracked the code used by the Marines is an acknowledgement of challenging an opponent whose strength came from sources they could not comprehend. The Code Talkers embodied an America that Japan's ideology could not accommodate, proving that America's greatest strength was not its industrial capacity, but its human diversity. This linguistic variety became a strategic advantage, and the Navajo language that boarding schools had tried to eliminate became a key to victory in the Pacific. Today, as the last of the Code Talkers pass into history, their legacy endures. The language once forbidden is now taught with pride. Native American veterans are recognized for serving at the highest per capita rates of any group, and the idea of diversity strengthening national security is an accepted doctrine. The voices speaking Navajo across the battlefields of the Pacific carried a transcendent message. America's true strength comes from its many voices, its many peoples, and its many languages, united in purpose but strengthened by their differences. The unbroken code proves that these differences are not weaknesses, but strengths to be celebrated, preserved, and deployed in the service of freedom. The Japanese intelligence officers who failed so completely understood the magnitude of this truth best. Their defeat was a recognition of a truth that transcends warfare. Some codes are unbreakable not because of their mathematical complexity, but because of the infinite complexity of human culture itself. The Code Talkers sent messages that Japan never decoded, but their greatest message was universal. Diversity brings strength, culture brings power, and indigenous knowledge serves modern purposes. These young Navajo men, using their sacred language first as a weapon and then as an instrument of peace, proved forever that America's greatest encryption is its own diversity, unbreakable because it emerges from the limitless well of human experience and wisdom. The unbroken code remains unbroken, living on in every native child who speaks their ancestral language with pride, in every recognition that minority contributions strengthen a nation's identity, and in every understanding that our differences are what make us stronger together. The Code Talkers proved our differences are strengths to be celebrated, offering eternal proof that many voices, many peoples and many languages, united yet diverse, create the unbreakable code of freedom itself.